Who will make the Rams 53-man roster? Who's getting cut? Got an update on Stetson Bennett? All that more coming up next here on Locked On Rams.
You are Locked On Rams, your daily Los Angeles Rams podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Ramley, and welcome to another episode of Locked On Rams, your daily podcast covering your Los Angeles Rams, free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Locked On Rams, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We're also available over on YouTube, so if you haven't yet, do us a huge favor, join the party and subscribe to the Locked On Rams YouTube channel, trying to get to 13,000 subscribers. And hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, hit that like button, and let us know down below in the comment section, what are your 53-man roster predictions for the offensive side? Who will not make the cut? My name is Doug McCain. You can follow me on X and Instagram at DMac_LA. I've been covering LA sports for over a decade, 24/7 sports as Side Dodgers Nation, the Rams for Locked On. And as always, I'm joined by the Rams pre-half and post-game show host for the Rams flagship radio station, ESPN 710 LA. He's entering his 9th season covering your Los Angeles Rams, the people's champ, Mr. Travis Rogers. You can follow him on X at Travis Rogers. And on today's show, we're taking a too early look at the 53-man roster. We're going to answer some roster questions. Who are some players that might be on the bubble? Also, the NFL schedule release date has been announced. We'll take a look at that. But first, this episode of Locked On Rams is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning bet guaranteed. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. All right, Travis. So it's never too early to start breaking down this 53-man roster. We're past free agency. We're past the NFL draft. And I think some very interesting questions. Of course, it's the NFL. It's football. You start with the quarterback position. And by the way, as a quick aside, I was disgusted this morning when I saw CBS had Matthew Stafford ranked as the 16th best quarterback. Brock Purdy at 2 and Matthew Stafford at 16. So that's a topic for another show. But let's do a quick thought on that, Travis. I'd appreciate it.
Yeah. Look, that is, I try very hard, Doug, not to react to things that are specifically designed to get me to react. I'm not giving whoever wrote that what they want by responding in that way. It is ludicrous. It is inaccurate. And I'll leave it at that.
Me too. I'm not going to react either, but I have an email to the writer and CBS, and I might even go there physically today to have a discussion about this because 16 is ridiculous. But let's talk about the quarterback position. Of course, Matthew Stafford, QB1, Jimmy Garoppolo, they bring him in as the backup quarterback, but Stetson Bennett back in the mix at Rams OTAs. And for me, the big question is his roster spot a absolute lock? I mean, do they want to stash him on that practice squad and risk another team poaching him if they're intrigued by him as a prospect? So that's really the interesting question when it comes to the quarterback spot. Of course, Stafford and Garoppolo are locks, but is Stetson Bennett a lot?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think there's a couple of different ways that you can look at the Bennett situation. Number one is the Rams clearly do not have plans for him in the short term. That's why you go out and you get Jimmy Garoppolo. The Rams are treating the backup quarterback position differently this season than they have at any point in the Sean McVay era. That you go back there for the entire 8 years that Sean McVay, I guess it's 7 years, has been there. This is the first time that you have somebody in the baseball cap and the clipboard that you feel like if they had to come in and play, you feel pretty good about it. You know, we've seen Blake Bortles and Sean Mannion and a handful of other guys come through there, and it never really felt like somebody that you were dying to see play until a guy like Mayfield came in or a Wentz. And at that point, a little bit later than maybe you would have liked to have seen something like that. So I think they're clearly treating the position differently than they have previously. With that in mind, I don't know how much Stetson Bennett plays into this. They moved on from him fast last year. Obviously, there was something they liked about him, drafting him where they did. There was something that just, flashed for half a second in the early preseason last year where it's like, oh, he's got a little bit of that thing that winning quarterbacks do. And then after that, he was dreadful. I know I've said this before. The everydayers will know what's going. he got benched in a preseason game. That never happens. And that's exactly what happened. Then he went away for reasons that have never been made fully transparent. Now he's back. So we'll see. I think that his name is far more interesting to people than his play. I think that the fact that he played for Georgia, I think that he won a national championship, the fact that he was, unusually old for his position in college is the thing that makes you know him. I don't know if it's one of these, oh, he's got the raw materials. I don't think so. He's little. He's got a big arm. He doesn't. He takes his business seriously. It doesn't appear that he does. So I think it's much more of a famous name than it is a really tantalizing prospect. That being said, you do need a third quarterback. You do need somebody on the practice squad. You do need arms in training camp. I really don't. I hate to sit on the fence, but I really do think it's a 50-50 proposition. If they cut him, I would shrug my shoulders and say, yeah, okay, whatever. And if they kept him around as we still see that little something, that's fine too.
Yeah, and I love that you bring up the fascination with Stetson Bennett. I think it's a couple things. I think it's one, like you mentioned, a two-time national championship winning quarterback from a massive SEC program. There's the physical side of him. He's not the biggest dude, so there's this underdog mentality when it comes to Stetson Bennett and everything that he went through during his college years. Then, of course, you talk about his age. I mean, his rookie contract takes him through his age 42 season, so I think there's that as well. But like you mentioned, I mean, he's still in prove-it mode. He's still in show-me-something mode because he didn't perform well during preseason last year, and I think that has a lot to do with it as well. I mean, can he get back to being a competent quarterback and show out? I mean, he did not look good. I mean, he had a couple of moments there, but too many interceptions and he gets benched. Okay. I mean, in a preseason game, that's definitely not what you want to see. So I do think there's a world where they could possibly move on from, they could cut him. But the good thing is you have Jimmy Garoppolo. You're not looking for him to be that backup quarterback for you. And just hopefully whatever he dealt with last offseason, I think that's another reason why fans are obsessed with him as well, because we just don't know why he was out. Hopefully he conquered those demons. And yes, it's none of my business, but my business is the Rams winning football games. So that's a big part of it as well.
Well, yeah, and quite frankly, I think that Stetson Bennett is more interesting on the internet than he is on the football field because, I go to every Rams game. I'm among the fans before every Rams home game. People know what I do for a living on ESPN 710 here in LA, and they ask me a lot of questions about the Rams and Aaron Donald and Matthew Stafford and Kupp. And his name never, ever, ever comes up is Stetson Bennett's. Like I never once has somebody said, "Hey, what?" It's just I think it's an internet thing. It's a Georgia Bulldog thing. I really don't think anybody's hanging on the is he or isn't he going to make the team. I don't think anybody's all that invested in it.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of Georgia interest, kind of like we talked about before the show when it comes to Bennett. And look, the beautiful thing here is he's really in a good, comfortable spot to just show what he can do. I think there's a little pressure off. I almost feel like he might have not expected to be back, and they embraced him and they brought him back. So hopefully he can make the most of his opportunity and perform well and find a spot on this team because yeah, I mean, you definitely need some depth at the quarterback spot. But coming up next on
Locked On, he makes it great. If he doesn't, okay. It's sunk cost at this point. If it turns out, wonderful. Love to have him. If it doesn't, okay, next.
Yeah, I mean, he was a fourth-round pick at the end of the day, right? And you got some depth, and the way that Matthew Stafford looked last season, I don't think that they're too worried about that position right now. But coming up next, we're breaking down more 53-man roster questions. We're going to take a look at the running back spot next. That's coming up next here on Locked On Rams.
It is winner take all time. Winner take all in both the NBA and the NHL. If you were watching yesterday, there's some tight basketball games. And of course, the NHL, there's all sorts of big leads that have been given away, right? And you're hanging on every single shot because FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers, you get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to spend on spreads, money line, player props, and more, right? So maybe you're thinking, listen, the odds have changed. All of a sudden, Minnesota's in charge of this series, but I still like Denver. I still like Jokic. He's going to find a way to get back in this. This is where all of this comes up. And this is why you've got to go to FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. Again, FanDuel.com/lockedon, LOCKEDON. Make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook.
And we are off and running here on Locked On Rams. Thank you for making Locked On Rams your first listen every single weekday, free and available wherever you get your podcast. Locked On Rams, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Also, a special shout out to those everyday listeners out there. We appreciate you watching and listening to every single episode of Locked On Rams. And you can join that Everyday Listeners Club too. Membership is 100% free, and you won't miss a thing about your Los Angeles Rams. All right, Travis, we're going to pick it up. Stay on the offensive side and talk about the running back spot. So you look at the roster right now, you got Kyren Williams, established himself as one of the best running backs in the league, one of the best running backs already, and one of the big reasons why you win 10 games and make the playoffs. Then you got Ronnie Rivers, Blake Corum. Of course, you draft him out of Michigan in the 3rd round. They signed Boston Scott. So you got 4 running backs right there that make the roster, in my opinion. The one guy who could be the odd man out is Zach Evans, a running back that they picked last season, the 6th round out of Ole Miss. There was a lot of talk about his talent and him possibly being one of the sleepers in the draft. But one thing that I mentioned when I talk about Zach Evans is the fact that when Kyren Williams went down, you went and you picked up Darrell Henderson off the street, and you didn't give him those opportunities. So I'm a little concerned for Zach Evans' chance of making this 53-man roster.
So we had Kyren Williams on my radio show yesterday, and we're talking to him about a variety of different things. But you could tell, like, his goal going into the 2024 season is to make sure that he's as healthy as possible. And let's make sure, or let's assume that is the case, that he plays a lot. He's going to get the vast majority of the opportunities. They just spent a pretty high pick on Blake Corum. So he obviously, I think, slides into that number 2 spot. If for whatever reason he maybe isn't ready for that number 2 role, whether it's pass pro or whatever it may be, I think that's why Scott is in the mix. This is an NFL veteran that's been around a long time. So those 3 guys, I think, can, set up apartments and be ready to go. We know what we're talking about there. Everybody after that, I really do think, is one of those you're going to have to show me, whether it's Evans, whether it's Rivers. These are guys that are going to be competing. And I know I've said this a lot, but I think that when you're talking about backup running backs, when you're talking about backup wide receivers, especially coming into this season, what are you going to do for me on special teams? What are you going to be able to bring to me besides, hey, you're my 4th running back? Okay, that's something, I guess, but it's certainly not as important as new special teams rules where there's going to be plays. There's going to be playmakers. There's going to be play stoppers. Who makes an impact on special teams, I think, will determine who gets that last spot. And, Rivers is not a highly drafted guy. Evans is not a highly drafted guy. So we'll see, who grabs that. But it's going to come down to who's a better teams player.
That's a great point. You always need the special teams guys to step up and fill that role. It's not glamorous, but someone has to do that job. But with Zach Evans, 9 carries, 19 yards, a 2.1 yards per carry average. And look, it's a situation to me where if he had showed out in practice, he would have forced his way into some opportunities. He would have forced his way into some reps. And the bottom line is he didn't do that. And on top of that, you went out there and you spent a pretty high pick on a Blake Corum as one of the surprise picks of the draft. So that tells me with Blake Corum, it's not only about providing depth. They might think, hey, he could split carries with Kyren Williams, or he could be that guy if Kyren Williams does get banged up and has to miss any time because he has for the last couple of seasons. So definitely think it's a pretty good chance he's going to be the odd man out.
I do too. And I think you said it well that last year, obviously, we start the season with Cam Akers on the roster. Kyren Williams gets hurt relatively early in the season when he starts to take over from Cam. And they go and get Darrell Henderson, as you mentioned. There were plenty of opportunities to have hey, let's throw him in there and see what we have. They opted not to do that. I think there's some information there. We talk so much about, well, they did this, they did that. They put this guy here, they put this guy there. What they don't do oftentimes, I think, is telling you just as much, and that they did not give him those opportunities, I think probably tells you where they are with him as far as how they trust him and rely on him. And unless he's made a market improvement in the offseason, which is possible, but unless that's happened, I think that he's probably, at this point in the depth chart, if you're lining them all up, he's probably last. It doesn't mean he can't climb, but he's got the biggest climb among the group.
And then on top of everything, look at all the money they invested in this offensive line with Dotson and with Jackson. They are prioritizing the run game. So anyone that they can't trust to really push that forward, they're not going to go with. But coming up next, we're talking about the receiver room a little bit. Got some very interesting questions with the Rams wide receivers. Who will make the cut? Will we see a surprise cut? That's coming up next here on Locked On Rams.
All right, game off. You know, we got to pause right here to talk more about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying. You flag on the play. You've already talked about that, right? But there is just way too much good stuff in the game that I got to tell you about. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with your friends. Those for time tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. And the more you win together, the more awesome prizes that you're able to unlock. And there is so much to get, including unique stickers that you can trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes, cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with, and hilarious emojis for taunting your friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go, it feels new. It feels exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique mini games like digging for treasure, robot pachinko machines, and there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go. So get off the bench and go download it now for free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on.
And welcome back to Locked On Rams. Thank you for making Locked On Rams your first listen every single weekday, free and available wherever you get your podcasts. All right, Travis, here in our third segment, we're going to take a look at that wide receiver room. I think you got 6 wide receivers right now. Of course, Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua, Demarcus Robinson, Tutu Atwell, Ben Skoranek, and Jordan Whittington. I think those are the guys that you're going to see as of right now. The interesting thing for me is with Ben Skoranek, because Jordan Whittington, kind of the same player profile. I could do a lot of the same things on the special teams. Ben Skoranek, of course, he's proven in that role. He's a captain in that role. So that could be an interesting one to look at come training camp.
Yeah. Were the Rams special teams any good last year?
And that's the thing.
Yeah. I don't know if you want to be the captain of the ship on a ship that sinks every time it takes them to the sea. Sure. Yeah, he was the captain of the special teams unit. They weren't very good. And I'm not saying it's his fault. I would put more of that on the special teams coordinator than anything else. But I really do think, obviously, Kupp, Puka, Robinson, these are guys that are going to have, the lion's share of the opportunities. Atwell, I think, is going to make the team. I think that he's somebody that I think they're going to try to make work. They did spend a high draft pick on him a few years ago in the second round, so I think there is some investment right there. But we're getting closer to just, I don't know, man. We've tried this and it's not there. I think Skoranek is interesting, and Whittington, like you mentioned, is interesting, but it's going to come down to the same thing we talked about with defense. Can you make plays on special teams? Can you pop one? Can you prevent one from being popped? I think this is a big part of where the Rams, depth is going to come from, is who's more effective on special teams. Skoranek, if I'm making the case for him, clearly McVay has trust in him. Clearly he's somebody that he's comfortable with, somebody that he's comfortable with putting in a game, throwing a pass to, having him back there to catch a punt or a kickoff or whatever, and at least trusting him to make the sound, solid decision. I think the case for him is familiarity and consistency. The case against him is the Rams special teams just weren't very good last year. But if you had to bet, I think it's probably, 6-round picks sometimes don't make the team. Guys that have been around a long time that haven't made a great impact don't make the team. So I think those are the names that you're looking at more than anybody else. Once you get past Kupp, Puka, and Robinson, I don't know if anybody's loving the position they're in. I think Atwell's probably pretty good. That would be a surprise, but it wouldn't be a, oh my gosh, they did what? It would be a mild surprise. But I think beyond those 4 names, everybody's in play.
Yeah, I think with Tutu Atwell, it's really just a put up or shut up type year. and then either you move on from him, or even if he has a pretty good year, they're probably still going to move on from him. But I think this would be the last year with Tutu Atwell, unless he goes and explodes and becomes that vertical threat that they need, because they were looking for a receiver. They were interested in Mike Evans, just a little bit of a dynamic, different type of player. But yeah, you think you're right. I mean, I think outside of those guys, I mean, it's pretty much touch and go. I think Skoranek, he knows the system and he knows the culture. He's a popular guy in that locker room, good guy to have around. But look, yes, he's cheap, but Whittington's cheaper, so there's that. But like you mentioned, being the captain of the Rams special teams, it's like being the MVP of the Washington Generals, right? I mean, really, is that definitely something that you want to have?
Yeah. I think that of all the things, obviously Aaron Donald's absence is going to be the number one thing that we look at once they start playing games. The number one thing that we talk about, how is Verse doing? How is Fisk doing? How is Tre'Davious White doing? We're going to look at the defense a lot and try to figure out what everything looks like. But quickly after we're done talking about the defense, it's going to go straight to teams, and we'll start with the kicker. Whether or not they're making kicks with Carty. But I think that the next question is, are they preventing big returns? Are they able to get, you go back to the Bones Fossil era, not only were the Rams they were blocking kicks, they were blocking field goals, they were blocking punts, they were getting big plays on special teams. And can they return to that kind of deal, or at least get a draw in the special teams? Because last year was certainly a net negative for them, and that's something they got to get a lot better at.
Yeah, and we'll see too. Will you have a player go in full Lance McCutcheon mode, right, and go off during preseason? Will a guy like a Drake
There's always
Stoops?
Somebody.
There's always someone. And Drake Stoops at Oklahoma, of course, he's a name you can keep your eye on. You get Xavier Smith still on there. He's a fast guy. He's sub 4.40 out of FAMU. So it'll be interesting to see if they pick up a wide receiver off the scrap heap too. So that's just where we're at right now. But we're going to be breaking down this 53-man roster all week. We're going to continue on offense. We're going to break down the defense. A lot of interesting questions, compelling storylines to get into as we break out this roster. But that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Rams. My name is Doug McCain. You can follow me on X and Instagram at DMAC_LA. You can follow the People's Champ, Mr. Travis Rogers, at Travis Rogers. Until next time, whose house? It's Locked On Rams house.